And as a youth ministry, we can't be the people who walk to the other side of the road and pretend that this is not an issue. That doesn't involve me. It's on the other side of the world. No, it's happening, and we need to be people who care, who hear, who stop and take our generation, take our brother and our sister, our neighbor, to and go together on the road of restoration and true healing. And so it is a great joy that I invite Gugu here. Gugu is an awesome youth leader, and we love having her. And so we can't wait to just have a conversation and for us to stop and listen to Gugu's story. I just also want to say this, that I know that there's a chat going on. It's always a lot of fun. I'm on there too. But this is an opportunity just for the next 20 minutes or so, just to maybe just stop what we're doing and simply listen. I know you might have questions, but the chat is not the place to do it. It won't do it justice, and we can't answer it right there and then for you. So we'd love to hear your questions, but just not in the chat tonight, if that's okay. We appreciate that you'll respect this time and just to listen. And so, Gugu, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You've been a youth leader here for how long now?
I've been a youth leader for almost a year now, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I suppose I did youth leading while I was at school, kind of, as a student leader. And then this year I came on,
Awesome.
actually being in it. Looks a bit different now, but.
Yeah. Well, we love having you. And you were over at our house just a couple of weeks ago, and we were having dinner on the back deck, and we were talking about all sorts of things, talking about how my kids are running off the walls and, all different aspects of life. But we weren't talking about race. We weren't talking about racism. We weren't talking about the pain and suffering. And here we are now, only 2 weeks later. And, we've got some big things to talk about, a lot of pain and hurt, And right from the get-go, you're a black woman.
I am.
Yeah, I'm a white guy. You've had to carry things that me as a white person have never had to deal with. And so tonight will be just an opportunity for us to listen, to hear your story, and that we can learn. I want to do better. I want to be better. I want my daughters I want to teach them, and so tonight I'm really wanting to learn from you and to listen, and so we'll get straight into it. Hey.
Yeah. Thank you for creating the platform as well. I think it's really encouraging to see that you want to learn, and I know you're not the only person who wants to learn as well.
Yeah.
Even last week, if you tuned into NYL last week, you created time as well to pray over everything, and I think that's something that has been really encouraging for us. So,
I just believe young people and all people in general have a role to play in every issue of life, and that God's truth, God's voice, God's Spirit needs to be in us in order to bring change and bring the message of Christ. And so it's only going to come through awareness and conversation. So I just honor you for coming as well. And the reason I asked Gugu is I was just trolling through Instagram and seeing some of the responses, and then I saw your response, and it was so heartfelt, and there was so much emotion and pain, and I was just like, wow, we need to hear some of your story. So could you just share a little bit about your life your background, some of your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I can start with my background. So, I'm originally from Zimbabwe, which is in southern Africa. I lived in West Africa for a long time. So, that's a place that has a heavy French influence. We had a lot of people from the Middle East as well, from South Asia, from Europe. And then I moved to South Africa after that. So South Africa has its own big history as well with apartheid and everything like that. But it's also known as the Rainbow Nation. So within my class, you could tell, you know, in a class of 30 people, we had people from South Africa, from different parts of Africa, from Brazil, Japan, Chile. These are just the friends I'm thinking of that I remember in South Africa. So that was pretty incredible. After that, I moved to the US. So we lived in Dallas, Texas for a while. And that was something else that kind of taught me about different cultures. So it taught me about mostly the Latino culture, I suppose. That's something I hadn't been exposed to before. But it also taught me about what people think of Africa from outside Africa. And after that, I moved here. So Australia is definitely a diverse nation. It's a place that I guess creates opportunities for people of many different cultures. That being said, I was also, you know, the only black person in my grade from grade 8 to grade 11, and kind of had that weight of, you know, being the spokesperson essentially for black people.
And that would be tough for you. So tell us a little bit, being the only black person in a white society, so how did you process that and some of your experiences?
I think it kind of, for me personally, because we were so well traveled as a family, it wasn't such a big shock of being, you know, I'm the only black person here. And there's still definitely other people of color in my grade. So there was that as well. But certainly, you know, you'd get to your morning tea and everyone wants to ask a question. Everyone has something they need to know. And you kind of had to give your perspective, but also, you know, as a grade 8 kid, I don't know everything about what's going on in the world, and that's what people do want to know. So that was definitely, you know, an interesting part of it.
Yeah. And so could you allow us into some of the pain? You know, you mentioned that there's pain in your life. You know, there's been prejudice against you. Could you share maybe just on that, like maybe an experience or just the emotions and how you felt like?
Yeah. So I think for me personally, pain was something that it's not been constant. Sorry. So you know, growing up in the multicultural place I was in, it's not something that was, you know, a weight on my shoulders all the time. And even now, you know, I go through my daily life and I don't walk around with a burden on my shoulders or anything like that. But definitely, I think as things come up and, you know, what's happening right now is something that's always been there. So every time something resurfaces, you definitely reflect on that. And as I was preparing for this as well, I didn't want to just bring my own story. So I decided to go out and message some people and talk to some people of color in our community and other communities and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to be sharing tonight isn't just my story, but it's, you know, stories from other people, their perspectives as well, and their experiences.
And just like you can't speak for all, I can't speak for all too, but the beauty of this is we're at least opening the conversation, isn't it? And it's not an end point, it's not a full stop, it's actually just the beginning of how can we learn, how can we grow together so that this horrendous sin of racism actually can be abolished. And
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in your perspective, what is racism and where do you feel it has stemmed from?
So from my perspective, or what I believe and what I've researched, is that racism is something that is taught firstly, and it's discrimination against other races, usually with the belief that yours is better than the others, or the one you're discriminating against. And when I say it's taught, it's something that you don't find in little kids who haven't had to learn it from somewhere. They definitely do see color as well. I was, you know, thinking about one of my Kids Church kids, because I do Kids Church as well, who drew a picture of us, and my skin color was different to his, and it's something he's always noticed, something he thinks about, but probably doesn't have any connotations or any ideas of what that means for him. And yeah, it's something that's taught, and it can also be untaught. So, yeah.
And so it's a prejudice. It's a thinking it's coming down, thinking of yourself better than others. Can you share the impacts that racism you've seen,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the hurt and the pain that is created by such?
Yeah, I think there's definitely different levels to it. I think there's the direct pain with what's happening right now. It's a deep sense of loss for people, especially when it's people close to you. But there's also a lower level of it, which is what you'll often experience, in a daily life, where it's people making you feel like you're other, like you're not at the same level as someone else. So that's something that is still pain, definitely. But
So
often,
it's like more like a subtle. It's not overt,
exactly.
but it could be in a comment, could be in a joke,
Yeah.
or what? It's not a joke, but like it could be in a stereotype or
Mhm.
that sort of subtle.
Yeah, that's right. So there's definitely quite a few different ones, and obviously what we see in our world here, in our community in Australia, is different to what we see on the news and what we're seeing right now in the news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And could you probably just take us to a place of like the raw emotion of it all, like, because this is you. You um, you know, a valued, beautiful woman, and then someone's thoughts about you. Can you tell us like how that can be crippling and painful? Like,
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that it should be this kind of crippling, painful thing, but for many of us, it's was from the get-go. It's from when we were born. So it's just a part of your normal life. It's not something you cry about or something you
wow.
deal with. It's just there, and it's always going to be there, sort of
Mm.
thing. I personally have never kind of thought of myself as being weighed down or been crippled by it. Definitely when I think of other people, when I think of my brothers, that's when it comes through. But yeah, because it's so constant, it's not something that's weighing on you all the time. It's something that's always been a part of your life.
You mentioned when you think of your brothers, what where do your thoughts take you? Are they thoughts of concern, safety? Can you tell us a little bit when you think of your brothers, like, and you mentioned that, you know, what are you most concerned about for their future?
Yeah, I think definitely from what we see in the news, most of the time it's, they're young black men who are growing up to be, older black men, and people have their perspective of that already. I was thinking back to, my brother going on a trip to the US recently with school, and he had people in his grade who obviously weren't black. And as we're preparing for that, with him, we said, don't forget, if the police comes at you, hands up, this is what you do. Always stay with someone who's white. If they're there, keep them in front of you. You need to protect yourself. And I was thinking about how, I have a friend whose brother was also going on the trip, and I was thinking, they're probably not having this conversation. They probably don't need to have this conversation. Yeah.
Wow. What a sobering realization that there are families who have to have that conversation in order to stay safe, and then other families that wouldn't even think about it whatsoever, purely because of the pigmentation of their the skin.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something so simple to say that I have a darker skin tone, but that has caused so much change. And there's nothing wrong with having a darker skin tone. There's nothing wrong with having a lighter skin tone either.
Right.
And it's something that has divided people so much purely because they don't understand it, and they most times they haven't been willing to educate themselves on why that is. Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful. So you mentioned that this has been happening, racism has been happening for such a long time, unfortunately. So how come this time is different? What do you see different in this current setting of the last few weeks in 2020? How is this different to past history?
Yeah, you're definitely right. It's been happening for a long time, and from the beginning, it never really stopped. This time, I think what's different, there's probably a few different factors. Firstly, social media is big right now. So something that happens somewhere else can't just stay there anymore, because people will share it, people will repost it, and it'll never get away. Things are also captured on video right now. So this is one event that was caught on video, and you've got to think of what wasn't caught on video and what was left to, the perspective of the oppressor in that situation. maybe even with what's happening in the world right now in terms of the pandemic, people have more time right now. So, before something would come up and they'd keep scrolling because they don't have the time for it. Now that they're at home and there's nothing else to do, they might as well, jump on the trend and share it and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And that's our cry, isn't it? That this is not a trend. This is not a put up a black tile and think that, like other fads have been and trends, that this will be blown over in the next 2 weeks and but this is an abhorrent stain on our society, on our humanity. It's a sin issue, and Jesus came to abolish sin, to eradicate it so we could live free, that we would enjoy the fellowship of a brother and a sister, that we know that we have one creator who gave and Jesus gave his life for all. I'm preaching
That's
now,
right,
but
yeah.
but I just, this can't be a trend, can it? Like,
No,
it can't
can't.
just be like, oh, I jumped on the the social justice bandwagon, and I remember that back in 2020. If we can't learn from this and take steps towards change, towards healing, towards restoration, towards wholeness, then we've got no one but ourselves to blame.
That's right, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think as tough as it is to see everything coming at you, and I can imagine, so many people are probably feeling down and so many people are feeling tired of seeing everything. It's also tiring to be living it. But I think it's had that advantage in that people have said, actually, I think this is enough. Let's talk about it. And this is why we have this platform here to say we can't ignore it. So we're going to have to talk about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we mentioned then, I think young people, we always want to know, well, I'll throw myself in there. I'm a young person. We always want to know, what's my role? What are the implications for me? I know young people, they want to change the world. They want to grab life and shake it up and make a difference. And so what are the implications for us as young people? That it's not just happening somewhere else to someone else. Like, no, this is something that we can actually change in our own lives. When we look inside, we put that mirror up to our own lives and we say, I can change. I can challenge some of those thoughts or mindsets, prejudices I may have. So what are the implications for us, and how can you encourage our young people to make a change?
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that, it's not something that we can ignore. It's not separate from us. And I think I might start by giving examples of what it
please.
looks like
Yeah.
in Australia and what it looks like every day, because people will often see it and, again, you just kind of brush over it or, it might not mean much. Firstly, there's things like institutional racism. So that's the racism you see in our schools, in our churches, in our workplaces, in hospitals. In airports as well. I went on a trip recently or a while ago with some school friends and going through security, everyone went through and I was stopped and pulled to the side. And that's something I was used to, being well-traveled, I suppose. I knew that, I always get stopped. That's how it works. And one of my friends kind of said, what's going on here? How come, we're sharing luggage? How come this person gets stopped? And the lady who was searching me was like, oh, it's either your skin or your teeth, darling. And I mean, I appreciated the honesty.
Wow.
So that's
your skin
something.
or your teeth?
That's right, apparently. So
Wow.
now you've learned how this system, an airport, a government place actually operates. And that's something for me that was like, okay, so I noticed it all my life, that how come it's only my dad who gets pulled up when we're going through airport security? But now, it's something that said, okay, so I'm not making this up, it's not all in my head, it's definitely real. So that's the first one.
So that's institutional, so that's
institutional.
Systematic.
Mhm. That's right.
That's the overarching sort of picture of it. And then what else?
There's also unconscious bias. So that's
Unconscious
something
bias.
that we all have, and I carry it as well. And it might have different levels, and it might be more common in other races than some other ones. So unconscious bias is, I suppose, these deeply ingrained stereotypes that you have, and these misconceptions, I suppose, when you see people. And that's things for me usually is people saying, oh, you speak English so well. Because when they saw me, they would assume that I don't speak English or I won't speak it correctly or that sort of thing.
Sure.
it's also people, I guess, when you're looking at people of color, you know, people assuming that you can't afford certain things. So my mom loves perfume. I don't know if Christelle loves perfume.
Um,
In the
yeah,
set.
she does.
Yeah.
Whether she gets it or not, I'm sorry, babe.
But my mom went into a store a while ago looking to get her perfume as usual. And one of the ladies said, "Oh, sorry, this one's a bit more expensive. You should probably go
Wow.
across the road to the chemist." So
Oh,
that's an
no.
example of something
Yeah.
that says you've seen my skin color and you already have your ideas
Yeah.
of who I am. So
Wow.
that's another one there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you got
There's
more.
plenty more.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So the other one is subtle racism. So that's the one that you see most commonly in the community here in Australia. So that's where it's not overt, and so it's something that you can't understand if you haven't experienced before, and it's something that if you don't have the perspective of the person who's being victimized in the situation, you can often just brush it off and say, "Oh, it wasn't that bad."
Yeah.
And that's things like people, for me personally, is people touching my hair when I'm walking down the street. So
Right.
that's where, you know, people would not do that to anyone else, but, you know, they've kind of looked at me and gone, she's different, her hair's this, and they don't need to ask permission because, you know, they might not see me as I'm an actual person walking down the street. So
Yeah, wow.
that's an example there. It might be, you know, in our schools, it's things like people mocking other people's lunches because it looks different to theirs because it's from a different culture. Subtle racism is also people asking where you're really from because, you know, if I don't look like someone else, there's no way I could be Australian. So
Yeah.
that's an example there as well. Yeah.
So we've got institutional, we've got, what was the second
We've got
one?
unconscious
bias, and then subtle racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun. I was in bed the other night. It was about 10:15, and my wife and I were talking about it, and then I got a phone call, and it was my mate from England, and he's a black man, and so he was just calling to say hi and just to talk about some things, and anyway, so I just said, hey, how you doing? Like, and it's again, he's had these things happen to him. Like, he was telling the story where he was put in prison overnight on suspicion, but it turns out the police were actually the suspects were white, but for whatever reason they got him and put him in prison. You know, and there's so much pain that that brings up. You know, and so we talked about. All right, now that we're aware of some of those things.
I probably should point out one that might apply more to our,
Sure.
the young people. So I think this is one, you know, joking, you mentioned it before, and it is one that's there. It's very subtle, and because it's a joke, it's kind of hard to combat. So that's, you know, people joking about.
It's masked with humor.
Exactly.
But the truth still stings.
That's right, yeah. So, you know, for example, I often get, you know, during summer months, people saying, you know, I've got a tan, I look almost like you now. You know, it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's often not meant to be malicious. And I also point out that I don't believe our Nexus youth are malicious in their attempts ever. And I don't think they ever come from a place of hate.
Yes.
But it's something where, like, if you're not aware, if you're not educated enough on feelings from the other side,
That's right.
it does come across that way sometimes.
Totally. Yeah.
Another joke that you hear all the time is, you know, let's turn off the lights so you won't see them anymore. And that's something where, like, we know we're different. You know, it might have some truth to it, but what's the root of making that joke, and what's the intention, and especially what does it evoke in that person?
Wow. I often say that communication is not what's given, communication is what is received. And some people just think that they're giving out jokes or they're making comments, and they don't feel the weight of how those comments, how those jokes are received. And so we need to learn, hey, who's on the end of my words? Who's on the end of my attitudes? And how can I then, understanding that there's somebody on the end of that, how can I actually change? How can I guard my heart? How can I use my words to edify and not diminish, and to criticize and to pull down? So how can you encourage our youth? What do we need to be looking out for and doing in order to not just leave this as a conversation, not just to leave this as a moment in history, but actually go on the journey of bringing restoration and wholeness.
Yeah, so I guess with those things that I've just named, I think it's important to do some self-reflection. So looking back and saying, okay, when have I unintentionally caused pain to someone, and how can I, stop myself from doing it again? What can I learn from that? The other thing is, you mentioned it before that, the Good Samaritan thing. You can't be ignoring the things that you see.
Right.
So I think you're never too young to step up for someone else.
That's exactly right.
And oftentimes it's someone in your grade, it's someone in your class who's experiencing this. So that's one thing there. The other one I think is just educating yourself on what's going on. And I don't think you should go out and have to do all this research, especially because right now there's people having their own agendas and, things out there are twisted. There's so many different perspectives and
getting the right information.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. But it might mean talking to someone, hey, how did you feel when I said this? Was that, what does that mean for you personally? It might mean the understanding that, okay, so what is melanin? Why is the skin color different to this one? It might mean, looking through and saying, okay, so if we're all made in the image of God, why is it that I don't see this person as being made in the image of God? And the other thing that you can do as well is, I guess, kind of being around people who are from different cultures, just being aware of the little things that make them different. So it doesn't mean, pulling you apart and saying this one's different because of this, but it means, they're eating something different. What is it? Tell me about your story. This person has their hair like this. That's really nice. I don't need to go stroke it to understand it, but I might go out, do my research, come back in. Hey, I was reading something about African hair, and I learned that this is what it is, and like it's really cool. You might say something like that. I think because we have access to so much online, often you'll find that you don't need to be, asking questions that might be offensive. Do a little bit of research, find out a bit more, and come in with that. I've done some research because I'm really interested. So, what's your thought or that sort of thing?
As we mentioned, this is just the start of a conversation that needs to continue on and on and on. And it won't necessarily happen on this stage, but I want it to happen in your life. I want you guys to learn and to listen and to continue to be self-reflective, continue to ask questions of yourself and of others, and for us to learn and really see that God created everybody. He's the author of our lives, and I believe if God created it and valued it and saw it so much and loved it so much that he would give his one and only son to die for all humanity, then that needs to be our very bedrock, our very starting point, in order to see that every single person is a neighbor. Every single person is a brother and sister because God created them, and to place value and dignity and honor and serve each other in love, not to criticize and point fingers, not just to walk on the other side and say, well, I'm not going to be a part of it. But we need to be a generation that actually gets into the mess, gets into the conversation, stoops down and helps and hears the pain of this world and says, I'm going to be a part of it. Other people might not want to be a part of it, but I'm taking responsibility. I'm going to get in the game and I'm going to see change happen. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So we'll wrap this up. But like I said, this is an ongoing conversation. This is not a full stop. It's the first paragraph of a big book. And so if you could just leave us with some encouragement, what would you like to say to our youth?
Like you said, there's a lot of stuff that can be said. There's so much more to this. And I think it was really good for us to make this very practical and simple for the young people who are listening. In terms of a final, I guess a wrap up and that sort of thing, like I said before, continue to think from someone else's perspective, continue to put yourself in someone else's shoes, continue to learn and be willing to, be slow to speak and quick to listen. And I suppose it's been so good to see the encouragement around. So my phone has been lighting up so much this week. It's just people from our community just wanting to show their support, wanting to do something about it, asking what they can do. So I think that's a blessing as well. And I think if you have someone in your life who you're thinking of right now, don't be afraid to message them. So naturally, this time can be, emotional for everyone. If someone is wanting to take a break from social media, saying, I'm living this every day, I don't want to be on it while I'm on social media, they might leave it for a while, but they'll get back to you. So, continue to support the people around you. Continue to, I suppose, to show where you're coming from, and especially from a Christian perspective, continue to pray with them and walk with them in that way.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I just honour you, Gugu. Not only you're a leader in Nexus Youth, but I call you a dear friend. And I just want to just honour you and thank you so much for sharing tonight, for being a voice that we can listen and learn from. Thank you for your courage and your tenacity, and for allowing us to have an ear and to empathise with your story. We look forward to what's ahead. Amen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the platform. Thank you guys for listening as well.
Yeah, awesome. I would love to pray. I'd love to pray for Gugu. I'd love to pray for peace in our land. And so let's pray together, hey? Father, I just thank you so much. We see your handprint on humanity. Lord, that you created it, that you loved it so much that you would die for it. So I just thank you so much, Lord, for our brother and sister all over this world, no matter race, no matter culture, no matter skin color, no matter how much money is in their account, no matter how much education they have, they are all brothers and sisters born by you, created by you. So help us, Lord God, to look inwardly, to see your DNA in their life. Father, I just pray for Nexus Youth too. Lord, that we will be people who want to see change. We will be people who desire to bring about healing and restoration. Lord, that we won't be people who walk to the other side, seeing but ignoring, but we will be people who see, stop, and stoop. And we will care for our brother and a sister and walk the journey with them. Lord, I pray, Father, that even this week we'll have opportunities to learn, we'll have opportunities to grow, we'll have opportunities to act, to bring about your justice, your life, your cause on this earth. I pray a blessing over them. I thank you so much for Gugu, Lord, that her life is a light to this world, and she's got so much beauty and life to share. And I just thank you so much that you'll just continue to lift her up and continue to use her powerfully. And I just thank you for an awesome week in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Hey, Nexus Youth, we love you so much, and we can't wait to continue to be with you on Fridays. Hopefully that's going to be in person real soon. Make sure you stay tuned. But I hope that you learnt and listened tonight. And if you've got questions, we'd love for you to take that further, maybe with the YDG leader. Gugu and I will make ourselves available to talk to about that as well. And so make sure you stay tuned to jump into YDGs soon. And